I found a brand new saint that I fell in love with. I'd never heard of him before, and you probably haven't either. Saint Devasahayam Pillai from southern India. He was born in the early 1700s, and he was from a high caste family. So they have a caste system, and it's Hinduism, and he was from a military caste and a landowner's caste. So he was pretty well off, very well educated, and he had to learn, of course, martial arts and everything else too, as well as a good education. And he ends up going to work for the king's court in a very important position. And he gets married. He's a layman, and he marries a woman who is of an equally high caste system. So he's working for the king, and everything's going along great. But something happens that kind of rocks his world a little bit, because he really believes in the Hindu gods and the whole thing. He believes in all that. But even though he's high caste and supposed to be privileged and not have big misfortunes happen to him, he's having misfortunes with his wealth, like his cattle dying, and things are going south, and he doesn't understand. And no matter how he petitions and makes offerings to his Hindu gods and goes through the prescription in Hinduism to remedy that situation, it's not working, and he doesn't understand it. Well, there was a guy, a Dutch Catholic military commander, who was also in service of the same king. How he got into that service was that he was in a battle and defeated. But anyway, and then he was in prison, but now he was serving the king because he had military knowledge, and the king was, he's a bright person. He wanted to make sure things went well. So he's taken advantage of this Dutch military guy and his training to train his own troops. So Devasahayam, which that is his baptismal name. I can't pronounce his real original name. Devasahayam is bad enough. That means Lazarus. But anyway, he's talking to this Dutch Catholic about his perplexity. He doesn't understand what's happening. And so the Dutch Catholic takes the opportunity to teach him about Christ. And then he goes into teaching him through the story of Job in the Old Testament. And this really resonates with Devasahayam. And so he wants more. He wants to know more. And he ends up taking lessons 30 kilometers away from where he lives. There's a Jesuit missionary. And he receives instructions from him for 9 months. And then he's baptized. So that's all wonderful. Well, now he just can't keep it to himself. Like, he loves Jesus and the newfound truth of what it means to be a child of God, and something that is elevated beyond what happens to us in this world, like his properties and things like that. Like, the real eternal reality is just a gift. So he starts preaching and sharing. I mean, not going on a street and preaching, but evangelizing his wife. The first one took some doing, took her a while, because she really believed in Hinduism and the way she was raised, and she wasn't on board at first, but she converts. And then friends and people in the court of the king, and so the Brahmins in the court of the king, and the people who are highly influential, they don't like it because it's upsetting the caste system. You see, Devasahayam would hang out with those in the lower rungs. Now, if you were with the lower rungs and you went back to the higher rungs, the elite, it's considered contamination. But he knew it wasn't, but they didn't like it. And that's how it is with the powerful. They want to keep things the way they are so that they can maintain their power. And you don't want to upset the caste system. That's gonna take everybody's wealth away and distribute it to those who need it. And it just was very threatening to them. So they trump up a lot of lies about how he is disrespecting the Hindu gods and not doing his job right. Just lots of lies on all levels. And they take them to the king. who decides, well, you know what, that we need to get rid of him, let's execute him. This is the ruling of the king. But before we do, they convince the king that he needs to be made an example, so they take him to different populous cities and they make an example of him, humiliating him in front of all the people. And then they're going to execute him. Well, a couple of things kind of go wrong for these guys because their efforts at execution just don't work right off the bat. And we see this. We see this in saints a lot who end up being martyrs. I mean, the crown of martyrdom is not denied them. They want it. And Devasahayam, once he was arrested, he wanted the crown of martyrdom. He didn't want to just suffer. He wanted the whole meal deal, you know. He did. Often, at first, it doesn't work. Like they want to burn a martyr and the fires won't burn them. Or they want to do something and it doesn't work. And this is kind of what happened at first. And so he ends up being imprisoned for 3 years in chains and mistreated and tortured a lot, but available for people to see. Like he's not in a jail hidden away. So he preaches to people. He's spreading the word as a condemned man in chains. And lots of miracles are happening. One of the men who is in charge of keeping him chained and torturing him, his wife is not able to conceive a child. And she, during this 3-year period, she conceives a child and gives birth to that child. And there's miracles after miracles regarding him, and his popularity is growing and the crowds come and they want to see him, and it's kind of getting out of hand. What they do is they secretly at night, cover of night, they take him away to put him in a secret prison place, and then they take him out to the forest to execute him, and they shoot him and they leave his body there. So a couple of things. Throughout the whole thing, he knows who he is. He knows what his goals are. He knows why he's here, who he is, what life is all about, and where he's going. And he holds tight to that. He knows who he is as a child of God. And it reminds me of Jesus, because he was a scapegoat victim. He was up on a cross, accused by the Roman government, the most powerful government on the earth at his time, you know, of being a criminal, a liar. His friends abandoned him. He was humiliated. He was naked on a cross. But I tell you what, Jesus never lost sight of his identity. He knew he was the Son of God. He knew he was about the Father's business. He knew he loved us and that he was demonstrating it. He knew what he was doing, a much bigger work than what everybody else could see. And that's what it was like for Saint Devasahayam. He knew his identity. They shoot him and leave his body. The animals, you know, they eat the flesh off the bones, and the people go and they gather up his bones, and they are in the cathedral, in the altar of the Cathedral of Qatar now, currently. But they gathered them up. And it makes me think of the early church, you know, in the Colosseums, you know, gathering up the remains of the Christians because they're precious, because the human body is precious. Jesus shares our nature, right? He was human, so we get to share his nature, which is divine. But that brings me to another point. So the reason why he was mistreated and martyred was because of his recognition of the human person, basically. That upset the status quo greatly, that people on the lower ends of the caste system were also children of God. They were equal to those at the higher end, and that he would associate with both ends and see them all equal. This was upsetting. It was threatening. Now, fast forward. This is so exciting, so stay with me. Because of his martyrdom, he didn't require a miracle for his beatification. So if you are a martyr and you're martyred because of hatred for the church, then that one step is, you don't need a miracle to get you to the beatification process. But you still, the normal means, you still need a miracle for canonization. And this was the miracle. It was vetted, as all miracles for canonization are. You know, it's an arduous process, and it was done recently because his canonization was in 2022 in January. It was the resuscitation of a dead child in the womb of a mother, a 20-week-old fetus. Now let that sink in. In today's world, where nobody wants to give an unborn child the rights of being a human being, his miracle is that an unborn child, 20 weeks, that was dead, lives. Isn't that amazing? So he upset the status quo in his day and time in the 1700s, right? And now at his canonization, he's upsetting the status quo once again. He's showing us that child is a human being. He's pointing it out. When our society, like the caste system, doesn't want to accept a preborn child as a human being. To me, that connection is just, I can't believe it. That's just like God. He just does all kinds of connecting. There's a lot more connections here. There's a lot more about him that I don't know, that you might know. Share in the comments. But I think that Saint Devasahayam Pillai needs to be promoted. We need to share his story. We need to be praying to him in our day and age where we're losing sight of what it means to be a human being. This is a saint for our day and time. This saint from southern India. Saint Devasahayam Pillai, pray for us.